Good morning, colleagues, friends. Welcome. Thank you. So, I'm Sarah Ayres. I'm Professor of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Bristol, and I'm Chair of the Regional Studies Association. Welcome to the 2026 Regional Studies Annual Conference, and welcome to the beautiful city of Gothenburg. We have a fantastic programme for you over the next few days. It showcases the breadth and depth of our scholarship in the field. We have 83 countries represented in our membership from a number of disciplines, and a lot of that work is on show over the next few days at the conference. I hope you have a fantastic and productive few days, but also time to go out and see the beautiful city of Gothenburg. I'd like to thank our local organisers, Martin Henning, Roman Martin, Hannah Martin and Sarah Franz. And I'd also like to thank two very helpful administrators, Yefe Wang and Tia Perangej. Finally, before I pass over to Roman, there's too many Martins in our local organisers. I'd like to just say, if you are here as an attendee of our conference, but not yet a member, please take a look at our website. It shows the full range of benefits for being a member, publication opportunities, research grants, bursaries for conferences. We give grants to develop research networks, and also now we have a new grant which you can use to promote the impact of your work. So there's opportunities for every career stage. Please take a look, and we would love to welcome you into our vibrant community. So on that note, have a fantastic few days, and I'm going to pass over to Roman. Roman, over to you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Roman. I'm the director of the Center for Regional Analysis here at the university. And on behalf of my colleagues from the local organizing committee, you should come up here. Yeah. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Regional Studies Association Annual Conference 2026. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly acknowledge our sponsors. Our center is partly funded by the Regional Council, Region Västra Götaland, which together with the city of Gothenburg is also one of the main sponsors of this event. So thank you very much for your support. The conference will take place not only here in the premises of the business school, but also in the social science faculty just across the street. Lunch and coffee will be served in both buildings. But if you have registered for any special dietary options, your food will be served here in this building. We also have a fantastic team of student assistants. They are easy to spot in their yellow t-shirts. And they will be happy to help you if you need any help with directions or any practicalities. So don't hesitate to ask them for help. The conference dinner tonight will take place in Lindholmen. And that's a former shipyard area on the other side of the river. You can get there by tram, that's very easy. But you can also, I would actually recommend you to take one of the free ferries to the other side of the river. That's a short and very scenic ride. And it's also a little bit the Gothenburg way of traveling. This is a wonderful time of the year to be in Gothenburg. The city is preparing for midsummer holidays. And many people are already now heading towards their cottages on the countryside and in the archipelago to enjoy the start of the summer. So we hope you'll have the chance to experience some of this special Swedish midsummer atmosphere during your stay here. Thank you all for coming. I hope you have an inspiring conference and welcome, and I think we should get started.
Good morning, everyone, from my side as well. Welcome to Gothenburg. I hope everybody packed their midsummer dresses and you're plucking flowers to get flower crowns done. My name is Sarah France. I'm also part of the local organizing committee. I'm a senior lecturer in economic geography here at the University of Gothenburg, and it's my pleasure to share this opening plenary. So this year's conference theme, Regions as Arenas in a Changing World, Rethinking Spatial Theories, is both timely and urgent. So many of the assumptions that have long underpinned our discipline are being unsettled. So artificial intelligence is reshaping the balance between humans and machines, environmental pressures are rising, and globalisation is slowing while protectionism is on the rise. Many of these changes and their implications are indeed geographical by nature. And therefore, this opening plenary asks a deceptively simple but profound question. Do we need new theories to think about and understand this changing world? To debate these questions, we are fortunate to have 4 distinguished speakers with us this morning, each approaching this topic from a slightly different angle. So our first speaker is a well-known face to the RSA community, Simona Iammarino. Simona is professor of applied economics at the Gran Sasso Science Institute in Italy and a visiting professor at LSE. So her work spans multinational corporations, globalization, the geography of innovation, and also regional development policy. Our second speaker, Dominique Foray. Dominique is professor emeritus at the EPFL in Switzerland, and best known for his foundational work on the knowledge economy and smart specialization. Third up is Cecilia Malmström. Cecilia brings like a rare practitioner's perspective rather to this panel. She holds a PhD in political science, but has been serving as a European Commissioner for Sweden and as Sweden's Minister of European Union Affairs and as a member of the European Parliament. Last but not least, we have a young rising scholar also on our panel, which we're very happy about. Kristin Smette Gulbrandsen. Kristin is a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Political Science at the University of Copenhagen and holds a doctoral degree from Lund University. So I think we have a wonderful panel here this morning to actually engage in this question if we need new spatial theories. So without further ado, I would say let us begin, and I hand over to Simona.
Thank you very much. Good morning, RSA community. It's always a pleasure to see you all. And thank you for being here early morning, actually. And I will address this very important question that the chair asked us from 2 different perspectives. I don't know if the slides are... I have just to press. Okay, right. So regions as arenas in a changing world, rethinking spatial theories. So my first thought is about the European Union. And this means that I want just to think about the role of the European Union today and look at how we have to address these challenges. The challenges are the usual ones. These are, as we know, global trends that, apart from the wars that are somehow new, have been there for some time, okay? Globalization and global production network, global value chains, disruption and the geography changing, new players rising, and climate change that is possibly the most important threat that we have to face, AI, and so on and so forth. This is this picture that you have here. I prefer maybe to be a bit, because otherwise I don't see. Yes, it's too small. Is from the Strategic Foresight Report by the European Commission and JRC. And you can see, I mean, you know, accelerating technological change. I remember when I started my career that, you know, it was the ICT wave. We were actually talking about exactly the same thing. If there is something actually new, is the threats to democracy, which is somehow a new perspective. Now, the EU challenges. This is exactly what you find in the Foresight report, so it's not me, okay? I tried just to summarize. Defense has come to the forefront, and that is new, okay, which is not pleasant at all. Competitiveness, strategic autonomy, balancing potential and risk of new inventions, people well-being, societal resilience under pressure, and this democracy that is a bit shaking. Do you see regions here? There are no regions anymore. There is a very important statement in the Strategic Foresight report that actually brings the second set of thoughts to my mind here, and is that under Resilience 2.0, we like now to numbers every kind of old ideas, we read as a first area of action developing a coherent global vision for the European Union, asserting its position as a strong, stable, and trusted worldwide partner, okay? So keep this in mind. And it doesn't move anymore? Okay. Yeah. Having said that, okay, all this accent and emphasis on competitiveness, on being strategic autonomous, actually is open strategic autonomy, but is a concept that is very unclear in a way. We face regional development traps. This is the situation, this is work that me and Andres Rodrigo Esposa and Michael Storper have been developing and is followed up by many also in this room, Ron Boschma and others. You can see this is, you know, a map that is updated to 2024, and you can see that there are a lot of regions which are not poor, which are not, you know, those that were in the convergence objective at all. You can see that they are stuck, and some of them, particularly, I would say, in the, you know, old EU, so particularly in France, Italy, Southern Europe, have been stuck, so really unable to recover past dynamism for something like 20 years. If you go back in time, you more or less trace that to the heat of the global financial and economic crisis. So this is, you know, a map that inequalities are evident. And here you can also see the work done by, again, Andres and, for example, Louis Dijkstra, that shows how these two maps are actually overlapping in terms of who is shifting to Eurosceptic parties, populism, which is against the European construction. So, not to mention regions, from the Draghi report to the latest policies, big, massive, mission-oriented policy of open strategic autonomy and new innovation and industrial policies for addressing competitiveness is problematic. It's like shooting on our foot, actually, okay? As long as, I mean, as far as 2023, there was a statement in the 9th cohesion report of the Commission that the European cohesion policy has never been so important. And that is actually fading away, okay? So you can see Now, the question, do we need theories to tackle regional inequality in the EU and the threats to democracy, because the two things are strongly linked? The answer actually, according to me, is no, we don't. And why? Because when I was, a young researcher starting teaching the political economy of the European integration, what I taught to the students, and still now actually, is that we have two big sets of theories in economics. One is pure neoclassical economics with or without factor mobilities, and new trade theories that are known as convergence theories that tells us inequality will even out, so we don't need policy, okay? Everything is going to be fine automatically. But since the 80s, actually, we saw a very diverse set of theories emerging, okay? From the new growth theory to the new economic geography, economics of innovation and technical change, evolutionary economic geographies, all of these theories consistently were pointing to divergence, okay? Inequality will not even out. Development policy is, in fact, needed, okay? So what we have learned since 1964, this is the map of the first map we have on the less favorite region, 1964, okay? We know that since the 80s, all economic theories, no matter what the ideological matrix is behind, have pointed out that economic integration, technological progress, globalization, megatrends of all kinds need policy intervention to aim to cohesion and territorial, equality. The evidence has been consistently in favor of these divergent theories. In any case, no matter what we saw is that the European regional development policies have been always a matter of political choice. Think about single European market, okay? 1990, late 80s, reform of structural funds, followed by European Monetary Union in the late 90s. And then we had the Lisbon strategy, cohesion fund. Then there was the enlargement, and we had the pre-enlargement and Lisbon strategy, the post-enlargement, the new objectives were revised, okay? And then the big crisis, the reform of the cohesion policy, and then COVID, beyond COVID, 7th cohesion report. So every step that entailed more integration brought about policies that were aimed at reaching convergence and helping regions to, raise their profile, particularly peripheral and disadvantaged regions. It's a political choice, and this is my point. We don't need theories. We need another shift in policies, because what we are doing now, and the European Commission is doing now, is actually going towards against cohesion. And this brings me to the second part of these thoughts. There is a rising interest by the European in general, the Europeans, for geography that is extra-EU, okay? And this is just a small example, because I'm not here to teach you. Everyone here in this room has her own or his own perspective on what can be important. But I've been working on critical raw materials and technological transitions, and we have a continent which is quite close to us. I know that there are some sessions going on in this conference about the African continent, the African countries, and the African regions. Still is Africa. Is like an indistinct, big ensemble of, homogeneously thought territories. You can see how the resources are actually not equally distributed as usual, okay? You can see, and these are critical raw materials, strategic raw materials that are very big and prominent in industrial policies, open trade, strategic autonomy, a critical raw material act. But if you look at them and the approach that is like, you know, continental, and this is what the EU actually is proposing, these resources are really, really local. This is just the Democratic Republic of Congo that is famous for for many of these materials, particularly the coltan, that is columbite, tantalite. And if you look at the map, actually you realize that it's just one small province actually, around Lubumbashi, and it's the Haute Katanga. That is the only source of coltan that we have. And that is, in fact, the corridor that is very well known as the Lobito corridor, that the US have been promoted in the last 20 years, okay? Starting, actually, the project is to start from Tanzania and connecting all the copper corridor that involve DRC, Zambia, and Angola to extract these resources and ship them as they are to Europe, US, China, and so on and so forth. So what we have here is, it doesn't work properly, that places, regions and community in these areas are squeezed, okay? Between mostly foreign, of 99%, corporations, mining companies, and national governments that actually are very tiny elites that actually, are appropriating all the rents. But our approach is still one of a continent.
Just press a few times.
Okay. So do we need theories to tackle regional inequality outside the EU? The answer is rhetoric, maybe yes. How many people are from African countries and regions in this audience? Can you please? Well, okay, you can see that, right? Do we have, as a scholar community, scientific community, an idea, common understanding of what we mean by regional development, local economic development? What is the Global South? I was looking at the official definition, and non-aligned movement, deteriorized geography of capitalism, externalities, transnational political subject. These are all definitions. I'm quoting Gall and Mahler, but there are many. And nowadays, the Global South actually involves China, who is going to be in the group of high income at the end of this year, according to the IMF, South Korea, one of the, most advanced country in the world, Singapore, Taiwan. We are talking about what exactly, right? And which economic theories are used to study these regions, this territorial inequality, the socioeconomic development of a continent that has a totally different, a very, very complex history? We apply exactly the same frame, and we work among us, right? Because I don't see African scholars participating to this debate, right? So are there potential of, relationship between economic south in the global north and economic north in the geographic south that can be actually leveraged for development, for mutual beneficial and equal standing position? How do we conceptualize the Africa of the region? We had a lot about the Europe of the regions, although now it's been discarded, but in any case, how do we go beyond this logic, which is there. I read all the documents of the Commission in the past 10 years about appropriating critical raw material, and it's a neo-extractivism logic which has really underlined everything they have been saying about this. And we talk about trusted EU partner, bilaterally always tackling 27 countries against one. This has been the approach. So, I mean, this is something that matters a lot to me after 37 years in this job, that we are just translating what we know very well is applicable in contexts that are, you know, totally different, and we still are doing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simona. I forgot to say we're taking questions at the end, so take notes. And so I would like to invite our second speaker, Dominique. I'll give you the new, hopefully this works better. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, good morning. I will wait for my slides. But instead of waiting, thanks a lot for the invitation. Thanks to the here it is, thanks to RSA as well as the local organizers to have supported this whole event and to invite me. I will follow really, Simona, actually the first discussion on the EU issue. So sorry for the non-EU people who are in the room, because yeah, we have a lot of internal discussion now. And the discussion is really about the next, what we call jargon, multi-annual financial framework, you know, which is going to start in a few years, and the national regional partnerships plan. So to what extent, you know, regions and countries are on the driving seat in terms of innovation policy. I will really talk of innovation policy, actually. So not of infrastructures, not of, I don't know, buildings, roads, ports, etc. This is really about innovation and transformation. And actually, we have these two arguments. The first one is and there was an open letter by UREDA, ERIN, etc., all these, you know, associations supporting regional policies. And the open letter to the Commission was about supporting the key role of regional policy and smart specialization strategies to assist regions in designing and implementing their own innovation policy strategy. And of course, view from the whole EU system, this is really bottom-up, right? Because regions are asked and are incentivized to, as Paul David said, you know, my co-author on smart specialization, to particularize themselves, you know, try to really reflect on what makes each region unique in a sense and try to improve these assets, etc., etc. So this is really something, this is a call for diversity, right? But on the other hand, we have now also the whole argument that Simona also recalled us. This is strengthening the link and alignment between the EU strategic priorities, so strategic autonomy, sovereignty, competitiveness, and regional priorities. And of course, we have a tension here, right? We have a tension between the idea of regional diversity and some sort of bottom-up creation of regional strategies, and more like top-down alignment to the strategic EU agenda, competitiveness, security, etc., etc. And then I'm not sure that when people are saying, you know, S3, so smart specialization strategy, this is the only EU-wide methodology capable of aligning regional strengths with EU strategic priorities. That I'm not sure, you know, it's more than some incantation, you know. It's not really conceptualized that, you know, we might have this bottom-up regional policy diversity aligned with the EU priority. It's not, let's say, it's not so easy and obvious. And actually, so the point I wanted to make is to try to discuss this, you know, to discuss the foundation for some kind of alignment from the EU priority agenda and regional, national and regional policy while keeping, this regional policy very much, in a sense, a lot of room and leeway to invent their own trajectories, their own strategies, their own futures, etc. And this is what I want to discuss. So I'm not sure this is a new theory, but at least this is to mobilize, existing theory which are very well known, to try to discuss actually what I would call, an allocation problem. Allocation problem means, where and when the allocation of thematic policies and decision is better to be done at the national level, and where and when it is better to have this allocation of thematic actions at the regional level. Where should be and when and for what should be the national states in the driving seat, and where this should be the region. And I think we have never really discussed it. And this is what I like to do. I would like to first, but I will skip it immediately. This is what actually the achievement of smart specialization from 2014 with the kind of Fifth Suite theory which has been developed with the first idea of, this combination between prioritization, which is some kind of planning exercise, and the top-down, planning exercise to establish priority, and then the bottom-up initiatives to really build the roadmaps, the action plans involving stakeholders, etc., etc. And then we have really the related variety theory, which helps to really understand, what should be the most effective prioritization for regions. And this is, of course, when regions are really prioritize something which is related to existing capacities to make these capacities more competitive, etc., etc. And then we have a lot of now, really assessment studies. There is a flourishing literature on evaluation of S3 in many journals, including regional studies, economic geography, etc., with a couple of very interesting results and findings that I will not describe now because, it's done and known by many. So now let's go now on really this idea of the fact that we have this new tendency to think of a new national and regional partnerships plan, which is going to be much more oriented towards giving the national states the driving seat. And then, of course, we will have dialogues between regions and national states about, what to do, at what level. But this is really the idea of simplification. Everything, the package of cohesion policy, agriculture policy, etc., are going to be managed at the national level, in consultation with regions. But of course, it is a big change as compared to, the former periods and the current period where regions had really a lot of decisions-making capabilities in terms of innovation policy, because we had this European ERDF funding, etc., that the regions could manage, given, their smart specialization strategies and so on. And so forth. And for example, so you rather said very well, maybe we go from, partnerships to parentships, where really the national states are the parents, and they will tell regions what to do. And so let's try precisely now to think of what could be the foundation of a discussion where we might, have some kind of sound argument about national states should do that, regions should do that, in terms of thematic activities, in terms of sectors, in terms of industries, etc., etc. And so this is not a new theory, but this is mobilizing very, very, old concepts. So I try to characterize sectors and activities according to 3 criteria, which should help us to precisely solve, in some sense, this allocation problem. What should be done at the national level, decided at the national level, what should be left at regional policy level. The first criteria is really obvious. This is, you know, to characterize sectors in terms of scale, indivisibility. Some sectors have strong scale economies, strong agglomeration economies. Why? Because we have substantial indivisibility in research and development in many dimensions. So, I mean, doing R&D in some sectors, let's say, you know, I'm very interested at EPFL about nuclear fusion research because we have a lot of things there. This is really about, you know, huge infrastructures, equipments, manpower, etc. So we need serious critical mass here. And then we see immediately, you know, that many regions just can't do it. So, while for some other sectors, these scale and indivisibility are less sensitive. Then we have a second criteria, which is, I think, something that innovation scholars don't really not understand, but, you know, think about seriously, which means that, of course, I mean, we all know that places influence the conditions of innovation. Given, you know, the quality of the ecosystem, the local ecosystem, you will be more performing better, you know, in some sort of innovations because you have the good university, the good capital market, the good people, etc. So, in any case, places are influencing the condition of innovation, for sure. But then, for some sectors, the place is also influencing the nature of innovation. What types of innovation needs to be generated? This is a big difference, right? Which means that, for example, if you are doing nuclear fusion research, of course, the place is influencing the condition. You know, you might have good universities or not, but it doesn't influence the nature of innovation. You know, the experiments you will do either in Zurich or in Paris or in Gothenburg will be the same. While if you think of agriculture, of course, the place is not only influencing the conditions, but also the nature of innovation. This is not the same types of innovation you will do in your agricultural sector, whether if you are in the Alpine region like me, or, you know, in big regions with big forests, or close to the sea, etc., etc. This is a big difference, because when the place is influencing the nature of innovation, we need decentralization. We need really regionalization of the innovation policy, because the innovation in agriculture will be very different if you are talking of Andalusia, or if you are talking of Sweden, etc., etc. This is key. And the final criteria is simply public good. You know, all these innovation policy and achievements have some kind of quasi-public good dimension, but a public may mean regional or national or global, depending on the geographical reach of the public good. So knowledge spillovers, market spillovers, etc. All these positive externalities might be confined within a national boundary. This is typically the defense example, but might be also very much local or, of course, global. So we have these three criteria, and so that makes actually our framework to try to discuss this allocation problem, which means that, in a sense, thematic allocation, so priorities and innovation domains at national level should involve sectors which have strong scale economies, where the nature of innovation, the nature is not sensitive to the place, and which generate national public goods, nuclear fusion research, defense security, heavy industries, etc. While thematic allocation at regional level should involve sectors featuring lower scale economies, spatial heterogeneity is shaping the nature of innovation, agriculture, but also tourism, many activities dealing with natural resources and which produce local public goods. So tourism, agriculture, societal challenges, resilience, etc. So you see, we have now some sort of framework to have a better discussion when we are talking of these national regional partnerships plans, you know, where we will have the national government and the regional authorities discussing. They can say, okay, that's for me, that's for you, that's not for you, that's for me. Really based more or less on this framework. And then we might have national priorities, so NP. But of course, national priorities are not floating in the air. Nuclear fusion research should happen somewhere. So any national priorities has a regional component. So this is what I call it NP lower air, and we have pure regional priorities, which are really priorities which should be decided and managed at the regional level. And now, just, you know, some sort of stylization of what my idea is that I'm pushing a bit now, to really try to think of these different cases. If we take here the space industry, the space sector, because I'm doing some works on innovation in the space sector, so we have the 3 levels, and we need alignment. We need alignment for the space sector. Why? Because we have scale, economies, agglomeration. The fact that the nature of innovation is not influenced by place. You know, if you are developing launchers, this will be the same launchers, whether you developed in Toulouse or in Munich. And finally, this is more like national, even European public goods. So we have this alignment, EU level, national level, regional level. Because why we have regional level here? Because at the end, the national priority is deployed into some regional clusters. While on the other side of the figure, we have tourism, where there is no national priority because this is small scale. The nature of innovation is influenced by the place, and this is more like regional public good. So you see the difference, and then all the coordination issues. We might have vertical coordination for the space industry, more like horizontal, because regions having tourism might share some, you know, best practices, etc., etc. I'm always finished. Now adding complexity, because space and tourism, this is simple, right? We see exactly that space is national and you know, very vertical, while tourism should be much regional. We should not just look at tourism for, you know, this idea of sectors with low scale, with the nature of innovation influenced by place and regional public good. If you think of all societal challenges that regions have to face, like, you know, demographic challenges, dealing with an aging society, this regional in the sense of the nature of innovation, which needs to be generated for dealing with an aging society, mobility, tech, social interventions, leisures, etc. It's really depending on the place, right? So then we see that there are many, this is not just maybe having tourism as the example is a bit of a mistake, because there are many cases for pure regional priorities, right? Adding complexity, so space versus tourism is a bit simple. Now, if we look of defense and security, of course, obviously this is national priority. It is national priorities because we need scale, a lot of scales and indivisibilities in R&D to deploy new weapon systems. The nature of innovation is not influenced by the place, you know, and finally, it's national public goods. Okay. Is it so clear? Wait a minute. Now, if we are working on border regions, you know, I have a couple of works with Ukrainian colleagues and also colleagues at the east border of Europe. This is not the same, actually. If you think of border regions, the nature of innovation in terms of security is very much depending on the place, which means that you will not guarantee your security if your border is, you know, along the sea or in the Alps, you know, as Switzerland has border regions with Italy, so then we have to protect us against Italy, and so then the innovation we are going to do are very different because we are in the mountains than, you know, if you are a border region close to the sea or big forests, etc., etc. And so then for border regions, and finally, the public good dimension of security for border regions is a bit different. Why? Because if you enhance security at one border region, it has a negative externalities on the other border regions, which means that if you enhance security somewhere, it increases the probability to be attacked in some other regions, which are maybe weaker, etc., unless these other regions are enhancing their efforts too. So then we have some public good, but very specific. And so then for border regions, I think it's really regional level that priorities should be managed in terms of security. And finally, if you think of resilience and crisis innovation, all these things, again, it's very complicated because we might have national priorities, like for pandemics, you know. Again, we need scales a lot to produce new vaccine, and the public good is even global, actually. While for natural disasters, this is regional priorities. You know, close to my village in Switzerland, we have the other village, Blatten, which has been overloaded by, you know, a mountain's collapse, you know, and all the innovations and technologies which have been to be produced in terms of monitoring, in terms of protection, predictions, etc. This is very much influenced by the place, etc. So we see that for some example like security, resilience, the allocation problem is not that easy to do, but of course. And finally, further complexity. We have so these sort of taxonomies of sectors and activities with my 3 criteria. So again, scale, nature of innovation influence or not by the place, and public good dimension. And so then we can estimate some kind of propensity to allocate these sectors or activities at national or regional level. But the final complex problem is that, of course, the characteristics of regions matters a lot to affect this propensity, which means that the GDP of the region and capacity, so it's kind of complexity index, like what Ron and colleagues and Simona are doing, you know, to rank regions in terms of their capabilities, etc., will affect the propensity. If we take the chips production example, which seems to be incredible scale constraints, European public goods, etc. And if we take the example that I think you made some estimations of Grenoble in France, you know, this is clear that this is a region, but these regions have all capacities to have regional priorities on chips production because of a decision of the state, you know, a long time ago, which means that these capacities are also endogenous according to previous allocation issue, which means that also, you know, even if we have my framework with the 3 criteria, depending on regional capacities, the propensity to allocate the activity at national or regional level might change given this. So that's my final slide. Okay, and so I think we don't need a new theory because I just talk of public good, of scale, and of the, you know, innovation, nature and conditions. So, but we need to think to think this allocation problem with this kind of old concepts, and to have some sort of framework to produce this kind of taxonomies of sectors and activities and estimate the propensity to allocate thematic decisions either at the national level or at the regional level. This is not black and white. We might have tourism versus space industry, but in many cases it's much more complex, of course, but at least this is a basis for discussion. And regions' capacities, of course, are also important and matters to correct or introduce nuance in this kind of propensity. What really I like to have here is to help, well, you know, I'm not modest, to help the, you know, the whole discussions which are going on now in the EU in terms of, you know, these national regional partnerships, how this will be managed and decided. We don't want actually does the national states decide everything, and it might be, you know, a sort of good starting point to have some kind of rigorous discussion about these problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Dominique. I think we just move on. Cecilia, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here at this conference. This is not my normal area of research, but I did write my PhD about regionalist parties in Europe many, many years ago. I thought I would give a slightly different perspective, moving from the regional level to the supranational regional level. Because I think whether we need new theories or not, maybe, but let me dedicate a few minutes to try to convince you, I don't think you need any convincing because you read the newspapers every day, that there is a new, or renewed rather, regionalism growing in the world as a response to the changing or the collapsing global world order, with the United States starting a trade war with the whole world, acting in total disrespect of the global world order as we used to know it, threatening NATO, weaponizing trade in a way we haven't seen before. And this comes in addition to a weakening of international or multilateral organizations and a quite steady erosion of democracy, as Simona mentioned. We also have the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a rupture of the European security order, a brutal, unprovoked war against a sovereign country. And furthermore, an increasingly economically aggressive China, which is challenging Europe and other countries as well. So countries from different perspectives and different sympathies are trying to reorient themselves in this new world. So we see a strengthening and a slight reorientation of already existing cooperation, but also new ones. And let me give you some examples. Of course, the European Union, as mentioned both by Simona and Dominique, established since 1957, but now slightly reorienting itself more towards the security arena. This is an organization, as you know, or a corporation created after the Second World War to promote peace. And it is now very much focusing on defense and security, which is a new role, but of course a necessity because of what's happening around us. New funds, new exceptions from budget disciplines, weapon, military coordination, support for Ukraine, joint ammunition factories, a quite new development, and at the same time trying to strengthen the European part of NATO. The European Union is also finding new friends, coalition of the willing in the security area, but the tensions with the US and also the challenges from China is leading to a hyperactivity in the trade area. It already had quite a lot of trade agreements, but now we've seen a flurry of trade agreements being concluded the last year with Australia, Indonesia, entering into force finally after 25 years of negotiations with the Mercosur countries, Mexico upgrading with the UK, Switzerland, negotiating with the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, and the India agreement that would not have been possible to conclude without Trump, because this pushed two parties that has been negotiating for over 20 years to finally walk the extra mile and conclude the deal that is now in translation and legal scrubbing, and when it enters into force will cover a trade area of 2 billion people. And we also see new, not really getting there yet, but also as Simona and Dominique has explained, trying to adjust or redirect a little bit the economic resources in the European Union, trying to develop a new industrial policy. We see, of course, the African Union as well, created already in 2002 to drive Africa's political and economic integration, promote sustainable development, ensure peace and security. And the African Union is partially modeling its governance on the EU with an African Union Commission and a secretariat in Addis Ababa. Now it is scaling up its internal cooperation. It has since 2021 embarked in an ambitious goal to create an intracontinental free trade area, AFCFTA, lots of acronyms in the trade area, among the 55 countries of the continent, to boost intra-African trade, facilitating customs procedures, diversifying economies, and so on. Progress is rather slow, but steady. At the other end of the world, we had the ASEAN countries, of course, an intergovernmental organization established already in 1967 to promote peace, stability, and growth. The ASEAN integration is now quite quickly scaling up, advancing and deepening, and the leaders say openly that this is because of the WTO crisis, the US tariff policy, and the geopolitical changes in the world. So there is a very high-level working group that has recommended deepening integration, build collective resilience, step up work towards becoming an old goal, but an Asian internal market as well. Again, a lot of activities here. And the ASEAN countries also have a regional trade agreement with the 10 countries, and in addition, China, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. In Latin America, we have the CELAC organization, including all 33 Latin American Caribbean countries, created in 2011 to foster regional cooperation. It has a potential, but it has no secretariat, no headquarters, no political common goals so far. So here we do not see so much movement for the time being. We see the Mercosur, the customs union between Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay, now concluding the agreement with the EU. But this is also reinforcing the internal integration between the Mercosur countries. And this might facilitate coherence also along the rest of the continent. Another acronym is CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, the biggest trade agreement in force today, not a geographical space organization, even if its members are concentrating in Asia-Pacific. That was part of President Obama's pivot to Asia, you might remember, as an attempt to gather allies to be stronger against China. The negotiations were basically concluded, but President Trump, in his first administration, withdrew American presence, but the other countries went through, and the agreement entered into force in 2018. So we have Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and Thailand, sorry. And since then, the UK has joined. So you see, this is not really a regionally homogeneous integration, but they are working not only to facilitate trade, but to try to set up common rules as well. Costa Rica will join next year, and there is a long list of countries who have applied, ironically also China. Quite advanced when it comes to rules and standard setting. The EU and this group, CPTPP, have now launched a cooperation in a more organized way and launched a trade and investment partnership last November with high-level meetings on the ministerial level. They want to address supply chain resilience, non-tariff barriers, streamline border and regulatory processes, and supporting reforms in the WTO. So this might be a new supra-region coming to birth. Maybe a few others will join as well. Is this a coalition of the willing to try to maintain, defend, and update global order rules and standards? Remains to be seen, but it is quite promising. And they're also discussing, but there's nothing done yet, but they are discussing issues such as subsidies, carbon emissions, things that go beyond trade, but of course affects trade, but is very much part of the global challenges of today. And finally, we have BRICS, a group that does not have a headquarter, institutions, no statutes, and quite few common goals, honestly, and no common geography. It was created by Brazil, China, Russia, and India in 2006, and a couple of years later, South Africa joined. It claims to be an alternative to the Western liberal order, and it has recently, only the last year, received a lot of new members: Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Indonesia, the Emirates, and together they make up 45% of global population and almost 40% of global GDP. BRICS is not a global player yet. Could it be? Maybe. It has so far too many internal divisions, but at its last summit, it assembled 24 political leaders from 36 countries in Kazan. They are discussing common currency, trade facilitation, etc. And this is, of course, in line with what we see in the business area as well. Business all over the world is regionalizing, allocating business more regionally, lower supply chains, local supply chains, in order to try to address the myriad of tariffs that are spreading in the world as we look at it now. So these geopolitical new realities are forcing countries to de-risk, seek new allies, become more resilient. They're pushing countries together to stand stronger, more interest-based than regionally proximity in some cases, but some not. Some of them, but not all, claim that they want to develop also a new rule-based world order with new standards, no new rules. Do we need new theories to look at this? Maybe not, but definitely we need to look at the geopolitical effects of countries coming together in old ways, but scaling up their engagement, and in new ways as well, based on interests rather than geographical proximity. And I'm looking very much forward to discuss this with such a distinguished group of experts in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. So we are now coming to the last speaker of our panel, last but not least. I'll get it for you. Okay. Okay, great. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to present here today and to join a conversation about regions as arenas in a changing world. My presentation is titled Region Work in Turbulent Times, and will focus on the active role of civil society in making regions what they are in times of complex change. And here I'll primarily be drawing on empirical work I did as a PhD student at Lund University. So let's begin with the premise of this talk. In times of change and heightened societal turbulence, a state which some political scientists describe as one in which events and demands interact and change in highly variable, inconsistent, unexpected, or unpredictable ways, can we still consider regions to be meaningful arenas for analysis and policy? And if so, do we need new theories about them? That's of course not a new question. As Doreen Massey's seminal essay, In What Sense a Regional Problem, from back in the late 70s reminds us, the answer to the question depends on how we diagnose the causes of regional problems. And ultimately, this is related to how we understand and approach regions as arenas for social and economic processes. I understand regions as materially and socially contingent products of historical processes, ones that are constituted by relations that are outside of their statistical or political administrative boundaries. Regions are plastic in their ability to transform and to retain their shape, and they're sticky entities that are thick with things that resist deinstitutionalization. So in short, regions are contingent but surprisingly durable products of social and material practice. If we accept this premise, then a follow-up question we must ask is how to best go about studying the social material production of regions in a changing world. Claims about historical contingency do, after all, demand an answer to the question of who or what it is that constructs a region and what this means in practice. This is where I think Anssi Paasi's distinction between regional activism and advocacy, or hard and soft region work, is an interesting starting point. This is an agency-based account distinguishing between the activism of, for instance, ethno-regionalist groups and the softer, more institutional advocacy of professions like teacher and journalists in reproducing regions. But when I started studying the Norwegian regional reform of 2020, which included an involuntary merger between the northernmost counties, Troms and Finnmark, this didn't quite match what I observed. In its justification of the reform, for instance, the Norwegian government was engaging in highly active forms of region work by presenting the regional system as a structurally archaic and functionally obsolete barrier to efficient governance, rather than, for example, a system of democratic participation and cultural belonging. It portrayed the merger as an inevitability. The government also performed institutional activism in its attempt to facilitate a common regional belonging from the top down through a reorganization of electoral districts. Likewise, Finnmark County Council undertook a whole spectrum of institutional activism against the merger, for instance, by refusing to adopt a new name and a coat of arms. I also observed that while the merger between Troms and Finnmark met significant organized resistance from civil society, with a group calling itself For Finnmark at its helm, many ways of contesting the reform and keeping the region alive were more indirect. This was visible in the common use of locally significant expressions and dialect words, for example. An example of this was the use of an expression referring to a collective we surviving or mastering a tough situation, originally meant to refer to harsh weather conditions. It was also visible in my interviews, where local residents described themselves as being used to being tormented and having an inherent distaste for domination as a way of expressing generational mistrust against the central government. The point I want to make with this example is that not only can we speak of softer and harder forms of region work, of reproducing a region, we should also look to the social-spatial contexts in which they're being performed and what kind of material and discursive resources this provides for different actors. We need to pay more attention to whose agency we are speaking about, and in particular, open our analysis to more forms of bottom-up and everyday forms of regional reproduction. I would claim that this is important for two interrelated reasons. Firstly, accounts of regional institutionalization and transformation often emphasize elite actors in their analysis, such as states, regional governments, and businesses. Secondly, when accounts of regional change do center civil society, works often emphasize bounded spaces, nostalgic identities, and reactionary politics, which reproduces a binary of old and new regionalism, where old regionalism refers to culturally meaningful regions, and new regionalism to regional economic units. I think this can skew our analysis in several ways. Firstly, it risks overlooking the role of civil society in the reproduction of regions, which in many ways is being institutionalized through democratic innovation efforts and a normative turn towards participatory and deliberative modes of planning and governance. In addition to this, it also forecloses more empirically sensitive and open-ended investigations of emerging, alternative, and subversive regional imaginaries and their relationships to struggles over regional futures and visions. It's on this basis that I suggest we must pay much closer attention to what I call practices of counter-institutionalization. Regional counter-institutionalization can be understood as processes where actors denaturalize dominant regional representations, for instance, through revitalizing extant regional symbols, generating new regional imaginaries, or forging extra-regional discursive and material networks. Acts of counter-institutionalization, in this sense, involve the articulation of regional imaginaries and desires in opposition to dominant visions and practices. However, while they often involve a mobilization of historical identities and cultural symbols, it would be inaccurate to characterize these movements as primarily backward-looking or parochial by definition. This is because forms of counter-institutionalization inevitably also involve acts of futuring and the articulation of alternative regionalities. So let me try to illustrate this with another two examples. One group whose region work I ended up studying was called Patient Focus, which evolved from a local campaign into a single-issue electoral list. Its mission was to ensure that Finnmark's biggest city, Alta, gets its own hospital instead of having to rely on a local clinic and a hospital 140 kilometers away. Against the odds, the list managed to get a seat in Parliament for the 2021 to 25 period. It received 15% of the vote in Finnmark overall and 40% of the vote in Alta municipality. The group's rhetoric tended to reproduce a historical narrative of intra-regional competition between Alta and the rest of Finnmark. This was signaled by whose interests the group claimed to represent, which was that of Alta and its surrounding rural areas, and in suggestions that corrupt regional politicians were to blame for Alta's disadvantaged hospital access. One example of how this intra-regional competition was marked can be seen in the picture on the left, which shows a statue in Alta city center. If you look closely, there's a slab of rock that's chained to the bottom of the statue. It was laid down in protest by Patient Focus in 2020 as a symbolic foundation stone for a future hospital, on the same day as the Minister of Health Services laid down an official stone in another city. This intra-regional competition framing had interesting effects on the group's participation in popular discourse on the regional reform. An example of this is the alternative map of Finnmark produced by the group that you can see on the right. It illustrates that the group felt that Alta's interests were systematically neglected within Finnmark County, and therefore that Alta should seek new political arrangements enabled by the merger, for instance, by joining the neighboring county once the merger was dissolved. In doing so, Patient Focus drew attention to the heterogeneity of interests within Finnmark and contested the story of a uniform popular will regarding the merger. This representation of Finnmark as a fragmented region, however, can be contrasted with another group's counter-institutionalizing region work in broader North Norwegian terms. The Coastal Rebellion, whose logo you can see as a mural on the left, is a social movement with roots in Vardø, a small town on the northeastern coast of Finnmark. The movement opposes dominant currents in Norwegian fisheries policy, especially the system of tradable fishing quotas, which has led to a decline in traditional fishing communities and a centralization of ownership structures. The group emphasizes the broader societal consequences of this development for the survival of local communities along the coast. They write, "We are committed to the future. We're tired of closures and outmigration. And we're not just tired, we are angry at injustice. But it's also love that makes us do it, love for the sea and the coast. We want to help create a better and more vibrant society, a living society for our children, for us, for the coast and for the future, for the survival of the kindergartens, schools, shops, sports club, the whole community." Unlike the internal regional fragmentation over hospital infrastructure, the fisheries question has in many ways been a source of regional solidarity. The Coastal Rebellion's acts of counter-institutionalization actually mainly center the wider North Norway region. This is especially visible in a number of protest songs that have emerged out of the fisheries struggle, which often emphasize northern unity in their form and language. You can see an example of this on the right, for those of you who understand Norwegian. Even so, Finnmark has been framed as particularly vulnerable to these developments, being on the front line of exposure to the negative consequences of privatization and centralization of fisheries resources. What I'm trying to show with these examples is that processes of regional counter-institutionalization don't only take place in relation to explicit struggles over regional mergers and boundaries. They equally take place through everyday practice and other forms of place-based activism. So why does this all matter? To restate my argument from before, I believe there are some risks involved in underappreciating the active role of ordinary people in shaping regional futures. When we talk about democratic participation, societal polarization, trust, security, economic well-being, and regional development, we are first and foremost talking about people. This is a connection that the artist Arvid Sveen makes agonizingly visible in this artwork, which is called "If They Take the Fish, They Take Us All." In times of societal turbulence, we therefore need to better understand people, not as passive recipients of change, but as drivers, facilitators, diverters, and contesters of it. People are active agents whose everyday practice and at times regional activism has impacts that might be difficult to measure, but are still worth our attention. This is the case in all kinds of places, but it might be particularly important in regions experiencing rapid change or peripheralization. By turning our attention to bottom-up acts of counter-institutionalization and the power relations and diverse interests that constitute them, we become better equipped to analyze, respond to, and even invite the role of civil society in shaping regional futures. in case you would like to read more about any of the examples or issues I've talked about, these are the publications that you can have a look at. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Great, thank you very much, all the speakers. I think, so apparently we're all good. We don't need new theories. I think that was, so Simona said, like, we need a shift in policy and maybe not essentially new theories, except maybe when it comes to the Global South. Dominique presented us with an example of how this new policy kind of could look like and could be managed, and reminded us of the industries, while Cecilia said that, well, maybe we don't need new theories, but we need to look at how regions relate together at the supranational level and how the world is reorganized. And Kristin just brought forward or reminded us all that actually regions are made out of people. So there's people living there. And so the role of civil society in actually shaping these regional futures. So kind of a bottom-up approach there. So I was wondering, I'll have one question and then I'll leave the room to the audience. So I was wondering, a question for the panelists. So if you have all these 4 different views, how do they relate together and how can we form a uniform picture of it? Yeah, that was my question.
I think,
yeah?
Yeah? Okay. I mean, we tackle really very complementary aspects, right? I mean, it's interesting to see. I mean, this people versus places is something that every now and then reemerge, and I really appreciate Kristin's perspective, but I wonder, and this is actually a question that I've asked to audiences quite a lot. I mean, I was a believer of identity of places, but what we see in the reality nowadays is that identity in peripherality turns out to be closure against foreigners, against migrants that come from elsewhere. Identity turns out to be very conservatory and very, I mean, you know, I come from Italy and this is very, very clear there. So, you know, my question is, how do we tackle people versus places, but in a way that opens up and consider that maybe for regenerating a region, you need inward and outward flows, not only capital, but also people. So, I mean, this is the first idea. And so, you know, all this can be put together, but needs a lot of adjustment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Would you like to say something to that?
Yeah, I definitely share your concern about about how identity can be mobilized in very exclusionary ways. But I also think it's interesting, at least in terms of the movements that I've been looking at. I mean, they're both mobilizing historical identities, but they're also making international global connections. They're connecting to broader global progressive movements.
Okay.
And so I think we shouldn't think of identity as necessarily being about exclusionary politics, about being reactionary, but also maybe a resource that can make these connections. So I think that's where the kind of open empirical investigation of
Yes.
these different movements, I think, is necessary.
Yes.
To look at, well, what are they actually doing in practice and what kind of politics is involved? Because we can see the same, right, if we're talking about populism and about identity, that we can distinguish between many forms and many shapes that might take.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to share their thoughts about this tension?
But I don't think it's really new. I mean,
No.
it's always been the case. Of course, now we have in addition all the populist parties and the nationalist movements and so on. But if you look at regionalists, I tried to map regionalist parties in Western Europe many years ago, and you have some of these regions who actually have a common history and an identity, and they try to gather. And as you say, the new thing today is that these smaller regions are getting more global because they see that we in the Basque community have a lot in common with the Sami population, or the Finnmark example have similar things, whereas created identities such as Lega Nord, for instance, where you kind of invented an identity of Padania, defined because we are not them. And that was 35 years ago. So it hasn't really changed, but it's accelerating.
But the fascist government is now, and it's supported by them.
Absolutely, yeah, but you could see that they were exactly the same at that time. Yeah, and that's what made them successful, because they identified the others as the bad and we are the good. And then we had to build a common identity that doesn't really exist historically, but we identify it as the others, the foreigners, the South, the ladrones. It's just that it's more frequent right now. So I don't think it's new, it's just 10 times more. But I share your concern, absolutely.
Actually, so maybe I have more narrow perspective, but really what has been said resonate with the idea when I'm talking of, when we are thinking of innovation policy or policy, facing all these big challenges that we have, to have always this duality between something like planning or prioritization, which is, the idea to generate mutually consistent expectation to really try to direct activities towards some kind of socially desirable areas. So we have that pole, and the other pole is really what we call in smart specialization language EDP, but this is just bottom-up process where people, citizens, communities are really engaged in building the action plans, the roadmaps, etc. And so we had that in the smart specialization policy from the start, right? And we really put this idea of prioritization and EDP. But we find the same in Andy Roderick, books, and Osman Roderick, etc. Always this duality between something like planning and something like really participation of people, and I like the idea of the policy as a discovery process. So this is not just a list of ex-ante instruments that you will, impose on your economy, like subsidies, taxing, etc., but really discovering the willingness to change of people as obstacles are removed, as conditions are improved, etc. Whatever we are dealing with, climate adaptation, security, resilience, just competitiveness, etc. And so then this is really an approach where government and stakeholders, communities, citizens, of course, people from the economy are engaged in this kind of dialogue to discover what is the policy path, actually. And the both ideas of planning and participation, bottom participation, are really intimately connected. And I think this is really the new generation of any kind of policy, whatever it is, place-based or mission-oriented, and so on and so forth. It came from history, right? The French and the British call this planification indicative or indicative plan, actually, where you have some kind of plan, but also a lot of then involvement of community citizens to really, specify the path. So I find, so we are aligned more or less on this kind of ideas.
Thank you very much. So with that, I would like to open the floor for questions. There's the first hand. We start here in the front, and then maybe up there.
Hi. I'm Henry Yong from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, China. It's great to hear from the panelists a very refreshing view on Europe coming from East Asia, and particularly Cecilia, since our 3 years ago meeting at the Heshko Erling conference in the Stockholm School of Economics, if you remember.
Yeah.
So it's great to see you on your home ground. You're from Gothenburg, as I know from you then. I do have a question for you guys. I think your claim of no new spatial theories requires a little bit too early. The reason is this. I mean, those of you who know I work on the global production networks and global value chain will know that I will argue that we are facing a very different world. The geopolitical effect that Cecilia talked about, the extra-regional stuff that Kristin was talking about, is what you previously take as what's called control variables. If I put in quantitative terms, you know I do qualitative work. Your control variables has now become the independent variables. When we need new theory, we need theories to think of new independent variables, put it that way. Now, we do regional studies. We study regional outcomes, which is the dependent variables, right? We have no problem knowing what are the dependent variables. But I think the independent variables have changed fundamentally. None of you talked about AI, for example, which is a technological change, which fundamentally changed everything. Put it in short, what you see in subnational regions in the EU is no longer perhaps even determined by the EU policies. It's perhaps influenced or if not determined by what I would call extra-regional processes. AI is one, geopolitical shift is another. There are all kinds of, well, my old man Peter Dicken calls global shift factors, which fundamentally reshape what we understand at the local, regional, subnational, local and regional, which is what we see in East Asia. So put it in short, we don't have the EU equivalent, as you know. We only have the regional and the national governments. So my challenge to you is that, is your sort of no new theory require kind of generalization a little bit premature? Because we are facing really fundamentally a new world whereby new independent variables need to be theorized. Thank you.
Henry.
Who has some thoughts?
Just quickly. Not to address AI has been a deliberate choice, okay? Because AI is power. And just yesterday on The Guardian, there was a big article on closing down in the US a lot of AI centers for very, very big worries about water usage and control. And we know very, very well a few players out there. So, however, I agree with you, we should think about more variables to put into our estimates, but I'm not completely sure that we have to change the theory. Because, I mean, technological change, and it's just that I'm a bit older than you, and I remember exactly having the same debate in the rise of ICT, the rise of China, the global production networks, at that time was global production networks, and semiconductor, microprocessor, how the geography was changing. My friend Dieter Ernst taught a lot about that. And I see the theories still interpreting very well. We need maybe more variables. And I would say if I was sitting here and being asked if we need more data, that is for sure. But theories, I'm pretty confident we can interpret things using in a different way the theories that we have.
Thank you, Simona. Anybody else wants to?
No, I don't think AI is challenging the favorite theory of economics, which is general purpose technology. It's a GPT, right? Of course, it's a GPT with a lot of impact, effects, etc., that we need to capture. But this is the whole story of Paul David, the dynamo and the computer, and then the AI with with a lot of issues, of course, but we have the concepts, I think.
More concentration of power. This is more for political sciences, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of theory.
Yeah, this is true.
Monopoly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have another question up there.
Thank you to all of the presenters for your presentations. I feel like I learned a lot from listening to you all. So my research focuses on Africa, so I was very happy to hear about the EU's engagement with Africa. I work for the Japan International Cooperation Agency, and we've struggled for many years to convince the Japanese private sector to invest more in Africa. It strikes me, though, going to visit Africa, that there's a much larger presence of existing EU-based companies, especially French companies, and to a lesser degree, extra EU companies like British companies present in Africa. If you go to Morocco, for example, you see everything from very large presences of the French automotive sector to even they have a TGV going down there. Even small details like they serve, to my great joy, President butter in the breakfast buffet, which is something that makes me very happy. Now, it strikes me that this is a big advantage that the European countries have in Africa that is somewhat underutilised. So my question to the panel is, how does the EU make use of this existing private sector basis and its deep historical knowledge and historical networks there to further its goals on the African continent? Thank you.
You're provoking me because I could talk about this forever. Of course, the EU companies are there. There are very big newcomers, but in relative terms, yes. Foreign direct investment from the EU globally are the biggest. And the biggest player are not just by chance the ex-colonialist powers, okay? Which have reproduced the same logic and extractivism, okay? It's definitely there. And what is the failure of the EU, not as a colonialist power, because it's different from some of its own members, to think about a different way of interacting. We haven't done it. We have been very much inward-looking in the past decades. We have not thought about different models of interacting with the closest neighbor we have, so also geographically, to me, is a mystery, right? And therefore, I just spent 2 months for a fellowship at the Stellenbosch Institute of Advanced Studies, interacting with colleagues from sub-Saharan Africa, and you see how, Europe is really looked at in a rather angry way, precisely because we have not been successful at all to change that logic, to propose ourselves in a different way. So it's a big failure, and we will be replaced, I think.
Okay, thank you. Cecilia, you want to have a quick...
There's a lot of mistakes being done in history, and there's still mistakes being made. But there is an attempt to interlink the private sector with this new global gateway approach, focusing on a more reciprocal relationship when it comes not only to mining and rare earth, but also development, sustainable development, infrastructure, AI, etc. So these partnerships that are being settled now is at least an attempt. It's too early to really evaluate, to correct some of the mistakes and to engage more broadly. And there's a lot of money in that, and also working with the private sector.
Thank you very much. A very quick one, last one. Who has a quick one here?
I do, yeah. Okay, just speaking to it. Yes, my name is Betsy Donald. I'm from Queen's University in Canada. And I loved this panel. It was absolutely fantastic, a great way to start off. I guess I would push you like Henry. Theory and policy, to me, go hand in hand. When you always have to think about how we theorize helps us think about what kind of policy we're going to implement. So I would push you to think more about theory. I feel the world has changed so drastically. I'm also a historian, so I understand the importance of history. But you're looking at, for example, Generation Z. A lot of people are looking at socialist policies from the past for answers for today, or fascist policies from the past. So personally, I don't feel like those are necessarily answering, helping us to answer today's questions. So I guess I would push. I think regional studies is about thinking about new theories as well, and it's sort of an urgent moment for me.
Thank you. So here, a very last one. That was more than of a comment, I assume. So very last one.
Thank you very much. My question is, I'm Sergio Palmeque from the University of the Republic in Uruguay, and I'm quite interested about the talk of Simona. And my question is for you, Simona. What do you think about the integration, about that idea that we maybe need more new theory to understand regional economies outside EU? I share your point. But what do you think about the integration between the theory that you already know, created in a way in Europe or the global north, with the theory that is actually created in the global south? You have been there, so I imagine that I know your answer, but I think that it's important to point about that, because there is some theory developed in the global south, and maybe it's important to the combination in order to have a partnership, not an unequal relation again. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Do you, Simona, you want to say something
say
about Dominique?
Do you want to?
That was the last question.
Well, I mean, I didn't say that we don't need new theories. I mean, I feel that within Europe at the moment, and I was clear about talking about EU, we don't need new theories, we need new policy directions, because those that are following right now are quite scary. While in other cases we do need, and my quest is just, we need scholars from the whatever, I don't use anymore global south, but from the different geographies to participate in a rethinking if the theory of integration, economic integration from Bella Balassa to El Agra are actually good into, tackling economic integration in Africa, economic integration in Latin America. We probably need some thinking. So I agree completely.
Great. Can I say something? Okay. I think unfortunately we're a little bit out of time. So thank you very much for coming. Now, very important, loads of work to be done. So we need still to work on theories and new policies in the next coming days. But now, before you start doing that, there's coffee. So please follow the volunteers to have some coffee. Thank you to the panelists.